Hi, my name is Caleb Morgan. I am 30 years old, and I own a small construction company just outside Portland, Oregon. It is not some huge business, but it keeps me busy and lets me pay my crew a fair wage. 3 years ago, my wife, Grace, died from a brain aneurysm. That morning, she had been laughing in the kitchen. By that same afternoon, the doctors were telling me to prepare myself. Everything after that felt like walking through a house where every light had been turned off. I got used to the silence. I got used to eating dinner alone and sitting in the living room for hours without turning on the television. I kept telling myself I was fine. That Saturday evening, I went to Evergreen Cafe. I did not want to go home too early and sit in an empty house, wondering why I still had not figured out how to begin again. The cafe was warm, the kind of warmth that came from string lights wrapped around wooden beams and green plants standing near the windows. It smelled of freshly roasted coffee and waffles. I chose a table by the window, ordered hot cocoa, and told myself I would only stay for a little while. That was when I saw her walk in. She looked about 29. She wore an old coat that had been carefully cleaned, and she held the hand of a little girl, maybe 5 years old, dressed in a bright red dress with a sparkling bow. The child looked around the cafe, as if every light inside it was magic. The woman, Harper, as I later learned, moved differently. She walked like someone who had already prepared herself to be judged. I did not know her, but I could see she was trying very hard to appear calm. Waiting in the main booth was a man named Brandon. He wore an expensive jacket, his hair slicked back, and he had the kind of expression that suggested he believed people had to earn the right not to disappoint him. When Harper and the little girl reached his table, his face changed. His polite smile disappeared. His gaze dropped to the child as though someone had accidentally delivered him something broken. Harper tried to smile. Brandon. I'm Harper. I'm sorry. I know I should have told you earlier. Something unexpected happened with my babysitter, so I had to bring Ivy with me. The little girl moved closer to her mother, but still said politely, "Hello, sir." Brandon did not answer her. He leaned back in his chair, and his voice turned cold. "You didn't say you were bringing your kid." Harper rushed to explain. "I'm really sorry. I tried to find someone, but everyone was busy. I thought maybe we could still." He cut her off. "I came here for a date, not to play house with someone's daughter. I'm not looking to be anybody's stepfather." I was sitting a few tables away, and my fingers tightened around my mug of cocoa. I saw Harper freeze. I saw the little girl look up at her mother, confused, not understanding why the man in front of them had suddenly become angry. Harper lowered her voice. "Could you please speak more quietly? She can hear you." Brandon gave a short, ugly laugh. "Next time, be honest from the beginning. Don't waste a man's time if you're showing up with baggage." The word baggage fell into the middle of the cafe like a slap. He threw a few bills onto the table and stood up. He did not look at the little girl. He did not apologize. He seemed completely unconcerned that he had just hurt a child. For a few seconds, the whole cafe went silent. Harper sank into the chair, as if her legs could no longer hold her. The little girl tugged at her hand, her eyes already turning red. "Mommy, what is baggage? Am I baggage?" I watched Harper's shoulders begin to shake. She pulled her daughter close and hugged her tightly, as though she were trying to shield her from the entire world. "No, sweetheart. You are not baggage. You are my whole world. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." Her voice broke on the last word. I had not planned to interfere in the lives of strangers. But there are moments when silence makes you part of the cruelty. I thought of Grace. If she had been there, She would have kicked me under the table and said, "Caleb, what are you waiting for?" So I stood up. I walked over to their table and spoke gently, careful not to frighten them. "Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt. I wasn't trying to listen, but that guy was an idiot." Harper looked up at me with wet eyes, torn between embarrassment and caution. The little girl stayed pressed against her mother's side. I crouched down, so I was at the child's eye level. "You are not baggage, sunshine. My name is Caleb, and I think your dress is beautiful." She blinked at me. "I'm Ivy. That is a very pretty name." Then I looked at Harper. I was going to have dinner alone tonight. Honestly, eating alone is pretty miserable. If it wouldn't be too much, could I sit with you? No pressure. If you want me to leave, I'll walk away right now. Harper looked at me as if she could not understand why a stranger would offer kindness. She was still trembling, but Ivy had already turned toward me with open curiosity. Then the little girl asked, "Do you like dinosaurs?" I answered seriously. "I love dinosaurs. But I'm a little afraid of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, because his arms are so short. He's probably angry all the time because of them." Ivy burst into laughter. Harper looked at her daughter's smile, then at me. Maybe only a minute earlier, she had believed the whole evening was ruined. But now, in her eyes, I saw a tiny spark that looked almost like hope. She wiped her cheeks and nodded. "Okay. You can sit with us." I pulled out a chair, ordered another hot cocoa for Ivy and tea for Harper, and from that moment, the evening changed for all three of us. I did not know that I had just stepped into their lives. I only knew I could not let a mother and her little girl leave that cafe still believing they were baggage. The next 2 hours passed faster than any evening had in a long time. At first, Harper remained guarded. She sat with her back straight, holding her tea with both hands as if she needed something solid to cling to. Every few minutes, she glanced at Ivy, as though waiting for me to become irritated by the presence of a 5-year-old. I made sure I never gave her a reason to apologize for her daughter existing. When Ivy dropped her spoon, I picked it up without making a fuss. When she pointed to the paintings on the wall and asked what was in the purple one, I told her it looked like a dinosaur trying to dance ballet. When she announced that she had a stuffed T-Rex at home named Mr. Chompy, I asked very seriously whether Mr. Chompy preferred waffles or pancakes. Ivy laughed so hard she almost slid off her chair. Harper watched her daughter laugh, and I saw her shoulders finally begin to relax. She told me she worked 2 jobs. During the day, she worked at a shop near the mall, and several evenings a week, she worked shifts at a diner closer to home. She had been raising Ivy alone ever since her ex-husband, David, left 2 years earlier. He had said he could no longer handle family life. One morning, while Harper was at work, he packed a bag and never came back. No warning. No real explanation. He simply disappeared. He left behind rent, bills, and a little girl who still sometimes asked why Daddy's shoes were no longer by the door. Listening to her made something heavy settle in my chest. She tried to smile while saying it. "I know. It sounds like a complete mess." I shook my head. "It sounds like a mother doing everything she can to give her child something stable." She looked at me for a long moment after that, as though no one had ever given her exhaustion a kinder name. I told her about Grace. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. I told her my wife had been the kind of person who made any room brighter simply by walking into it. I told her she died suddenly. I told her that after the funeral, I buried myself in work, because if I stopped moving, I would have to sit in that quiet house and feel how empty it had become. Harper reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. It was a small gesture, barely any pressure at all, but it made me fall silent for several seconds. Her palm was warm from the teacup. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Thank you." For a while, we said nothing else. We simply sat there, her hand over mine, while Ivy carefully finished the last piece of her cookie, chocolate smeared above her lip. She was fighting sleep, but refusing to admit it, blinking hard every time her eyes started to close. Mrs. Bellamy, the owner, kept coming by with extra napkins and tiny mints, giving us the kind of knowing look that said she had seen enough lonely people in that cafe to recognize when something special was happening. When the cafe began to close, I helped Harper put Ivy's coat on. The little girl was so tired that her head kept tipping forward. I offered to carry her to the car, and Harper did not argue. She just looked at me for a second, then nodded. Ivy was lighter than I expected. One small hand still clutched the cookie she had insisted on taking home, wrapped in a napkin. I buckled her into the child seat in the back of Harper's old sedan, made sure the straps were not twisted, and pulled a small blanket over her chest. For years, I had carried lumber, steel beams, and bags of concrete. But that night, the simple act of fastening a seat belt around a sleeping child softened something inside my chest in a way I had not felt in years. Harper stood beside the car, watching me. "You do that like you've done it before." I smiled. "I have nieces and nephews. And a grown man should know how to handle a car seat." She laughed. It was the first real laugh I heard from her, one without tears underneath it. I took a napkin from my jacket pocket, pulled out a pen, and wrote down my number. "If you ever want to have dinner again, not a blind date, no pressure, just two people who survived one very strange evening together." She took the napkin. "No Brandon this time." "Definitely no Brandon. I think we've both had enough blind dates for a lifetime." She looked at me with something warm and frightened in her eyes. "Thank you, Caleb, for sitting with us." I answered without thinking. "Thank you for letting me." When her car pulled out of the parking lot, I stood in the cold and watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. I did not know where any of it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I did not want to go home just to hide. After that, it began with small things. The next afternoon, Harper sent me a message. "Ivy wants to know if the T-Rex is really angry because of his short arms." I wrote back, "Absolutely. That's why he roars so much." She sent me a drawing Ivy had made of a dinosaur wearing a crooked party hat. I replied with a photo of a burned dinner I had tried to cook and wrote, "Proof that I need adult supervision in the kitchen." We kept texting. Then we started meeting for coffee on days when Ivy was at preschool. Then came weekends at the park. I pushed Ivy on the swings and made dramatic airplane crash sounds every time I pushed too gently, which made her squeal with laughter. Harper sat on the bench and watched us. Her face softened in a way that made it clear she was not used to simply sitting and resting. Within a month, I had become part of their lives without any of us really planning it. I fixed the leaking faucet in Harper's apartment. I checked her car when it started making a strange noise. I brought soup when Ivy had a mild fever. I did not do those things because I wanted Harper to owe me anything. I did them because I liked having a reason to see them. I liked the way Ivy shouted, "Mr. Caleb," the second she opened the door. I liked watching Harper slowly stop carrying everything alone. One evening, after Ivy fell asleep on my couch during a cartoon, Harper stood by the kitchen sink rinsing our mugs. I walked in and saw her staring out the window, her eyes slightly wet. "Are you okay?" I asked. Her answer was so quiet I almost missed it. "I'm not used to someone staying." I stepped closer and stood beside her. "Then I'll help you get used to it." She turned and looked at me. We were so close that I could see tiny gold flecks in her eyes. I wanted to kiss her, but I did not move. A woman who had been abandoned the way she had needed safety before romance. So I simply said, "I'm not Brandon. And I'm not David." Her voice trembled when she answered. "I want to believe that." "Then let me prove it." "You don't have to believe it today." She looked at me as though those words frightened her more than anything else I could have said. That night, when she drove Ivy home, I stood on the porch and watched until her headlights disappeared around the corner. It was like the first night, except this time I was not helping strangers. This time, I was waiting for a little family to come back. The good stretch did not last long. I felt it before Harper said anything. Her messages became shorter. One weekend, she cancelled our plans for the park, saying she needed to pick up extra shifts. She stopped answering my calls in the evenings. I knew that kind of distance. I had lived inside it for 3 years after Grace died. When something important starts slipping away, you feel the space before the words are spoken. I did not push, but I waited. One evening, I drove to her apartment after Ivy was asleep. Harper opened the door in an old sweatshirt, her hair tied up in a messy knot. Her eyes were red, although she would have denied crying if I had asked. She looked like someone who had been quietly falling apart for hours, and was still trying to hold everything together. "What's going on?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "Nothing. I'm just tired." "Harper." That was all I said. She knew I did not believe her. Her lips trembled. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, as if trying to escape the expression on my face. I followed but stopped a few steps away. "You're pulling away from me," I said. "I'm not angry. I just need to know why." She was silent for a long time. Then everything spilled out at once. David had come back. He had shown up at her door one afternoon in nice clothes, carrying the same casual confidence he had always had, as if 2 years of absence had merely been a long business trip. He told her he had heard she was seeing some guy and wanted to make sure she was not letting the wrong kind of people around Ivy. Harper reminded him that he had been the one who left. He had stopped sending enough money. He had stopped visiting. He had stopped calling on any regular schedule. David had simply smiled and told her that, on paper, he was still Ivy's father. If Harper was not careful, he would hire a lawyer and reopen the custody arrangement. My hands curled into fists. He threatened to take Ivy. Harper nodded. Tears slid down her face. He doesn't actually want to raise her. He just can't stand the idea that I might be happy without him. "Why didn't you tell me?" She gave a short, painful laugh. "Because this is exactly the kind of thing men run from. An ex-husband. Court. Lawyer fees. A child caught in the middle. You already lost your wife, Caleb. You've already been through enough. I didn't want to drag you into my mess." I stepped closer and took her hands. "I'm not him." "I know." "No, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be deciding for me that I'm going to leave." She cried harder. "I'm scared," she said. "I'm scared of losing Ivy. I'm scared of letting her love you and then having you leave. I'm scared of falling in love with you and ending up in my living room again, holding my daughter and wondering why I was not enough for someone to stay." That sentence hit me harder than anything she could have thrown at me. I pulled her against my chest. At first, she stayed tense. Then she let herself lean into me. "Listen to me," I said into her hair. "I can't promise everything will be easy. But I can promise I won't walk away just because things get hard. If David wants to threaten you, we'll hire a lawyer. If you need someone to go with you to court, I'll be there. If you need to sit in the kitchen and cry, I'll sit with you. But don't close the door in my face and call it protecting me. She looked up at me with swollen eyes. I need time. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her she could not make that choice for both of us. But I also knew that people who had been hurt the way she had could not be forced to accept love. They had to choose it themselves. So I nodded. Okay. I'll give you time. But I'm still here. She looked at me as though those words frightened her more than goodbye would have. That night, she closed the door behind me. I stood in the hallway for several seconds, listening to her cry on the other side, and it took everything in me not to knock again. The next 2 weeks felt longer than 2 months. I respected the space she had asked for, but that did not make it easier. Every time my phone screen lit up, I hoped it was her. Every time I drove past Evergreen Cafe, I remembered that first evening. I wondered whether I should have been stronger. Whether I should have knocked on her door and told her she had no right to destroy something good just because she was afraid. But then I remembered her face when she said she needed time, and I stopped myself. Ivy felt it too. Harper later told me that the little girl kept asking when she would see me again. Then she asked less and less, until she stopped asking completely. That hurt Harper more than anything David had said. Meanwhile, David really did file papers asking the court to reconsider custody. He claimed Harper was unstable because she worked too much and exposed Ivy to a strange man. He had never been a reliable father, but on paper, he knew how to make himself look like the victim. Harper picked up extra shifts to pay for a lawyer. She was exhausted and terrified, and still she did not call me. Until one evening in January, when her car died on a dark road several miles from her apartment. It was freezing outside. Ivy sat in the back seat, wrapped in her coat, asking why the car was making strange sounds. Harper tried calling several people. No one answered. Finally, Ivy called from the back seat. "Mommy, why don't you call Mr. Caleb? Mr. Caleb can fix anything." Harper told me later that she stared at her phone for a long time. She was afraid I would not answer. She was afraid I would. She was afraid she had lost the right to ask. But she called. I answered on the first ring. "Harper. Are you okay?" She barely managed to say something about the car and Ivy in the back seat before I was already grabbing my coat and keys. "Send me your location. Lock the doors. I'm coming." I got there in less than 15 minutes. When my headlights lit up her old sedan pulled off onto the shoulder, something in my chest started beating again. I parked, got out, and went straight to her door. She stepped out and immediately began to cry. I did not ask about the car first. I simply hugged her. "I'm here." She gripped the front of my jacket like she was drowning. "I'm sorry. Later. Right now, we're getting you both out of the cold." I checked the car. It was only a loose battery connection, made worse by the cold and age. I got it running well enough for her to follow me back to my house. No arguments. Ivy woke up when we arrived and lit up the second she saw me. I knew Mr. Caleb would come, she kept telling her mother again and again. That night, after Ivy fell asleep on my couch, Harper told me everything. The court papers. David's threats. The shame and fear that had made her push me away. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I took her hands. "Tomorrow, I'm calling a lawyer. I know one who helped one of my guys with a family dispute. He's good, and he owes me a favor." Harper immediately shook her head. "No, Caleb. I can't let you pay for this. This isn't charity. This is me standing beside the woman I love. She went completely still. I froze too, because the words had already left my mouth. But I did not take them back. I love you, Harper. I love the way you protect Ivy. I love how strong you are. I love even the parts of yourself you think are too complicated. I don't want peace if the price is not having you. I would rather be afraid with you than comfortable alone. Harper cried. But this time, she did not pull away. She kissed me first. I knew then that the fight with David was not over. But we had finally stopped standing on opposite sides of a closed door. The months that followed were long and difficult. Every week brought another stack of documents, another court date, another extra shift Harper took to pay legal fees. David tried to present himself as a wounded father who had been kept away from his child. He claimed Harper worked too much, that Ivy lacked stability, and that I was a stranger who had entered their lives too quickly. He said he only wanted to protect his daughter. But the truth did not match the picture he tried to paint. Mark Ellis, the attorney I called, was quiet and sharp in a way that made people uneasy. He requested everything: records, bank transfers, visitation logs, old text messages, emails. Harper hated having to gather it all. Every unanswered message, every broken promise, every month David disappeared, it was like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. Some evenings, she sat at my kitchen table with papers spread in front of her, her hands shaking. I hate this, she said one night in a quiet voice. I hate that I have to prove I'm a good mother. I sat beside her. You're not proving it to him. You're showing the court what Ivy already knows. What's that? That you are her home. She covered her face with her hands and cried softly. I did not try to stop her. Sometimes the only way not to break is to let the tears come. Ivy felt the heaviness too, even if she did not understand the words. She stayed closer to Harper, woke up more often at night, and sometimes asked whether her dad was going to take her away. On those nights, I did not try to take Harper's place. I simply stayed nearby so Ivy would know there was another adult in the room, who would not disappear when things became hard. One evening, she was coloring at my kitchen table when she suddenly looked up. Papa Caleb, what should I do if I'm scared? I set my glass down. You can tell an adult you trust. What if the adult is scared too? I looked at Harper, who had frozen near the sink. Then we're scared together, I said. Being scared together is still better than being scared alone. Ivy thought about that for a while, then nodded as if she had learned something important. On the day we went to court, Harper wore the only blazer she owned. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and she held her bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Before we entered the courtroom, she whispered, I think I'm going to be sick. I took her hand. Look at me. You're not going in there to ask permission to be Ivy's mother. You already are. You're going in there only to protect what already exists. She took a deep breath and nodded. Inside, David tried to play his part. He talked about how Harper had kept him from his daughter. He called me a dangerous stranger. But when Mark began presenting the evidence, months of unpaid child support, not a single parent meeting attended, ignored requests to call Ivy on her birthday, David's confidence started to crumble. Every time Mark asked a simple question, like how many times he had taken his daughter to the doctor in the last 2 years, or how many school events he had attended, David's answers became smaller and smaller until he had almost nothing left to say. Then it was Harper's turn. She stood before the judge. At first, her voice trembled. But the longer she spoke, the steadier it became. She told the court about extra shifts. About nights when Ivy had a fever, and she had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying medicine. She told them about mornings when she drove her daughter to school and ran straight to work, sometimes lying and saying Daddy was busy so Ivy would not think she was not worth coming back for. I am not perfect, she said. I worry. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. But I have never abandoned my child. I have never made Ivy wonder whether her mother would come back. I have been there every single day. I sat behind her, watching the woman who had once cried in a cafe because someone called her daughter a burden now stand in a courtroom and fight for that same child with everything she had. She was no longer merely surviving. She was taking her story back. When the judge finally spoke, the words were clear. Harper would keep full custody. David would receive only supervised visitation. He would have to meet his financial obligations and complete counseling before requesting any further changes. The judge made it clear that being a parent was not something a person could remember only when it was convenient, or when they wanted control. When it was over, Harper almost collapsed. I stood and caught her. She turned and buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. It's over, she whispered. You did it. She held on tighter. No. We did it. Outside the courthouse, Ivy ran toward her mother and threw herself into her arms. Harper dropped to her knees and hugged her so tightly the little girl laughed. Mommy, did we win? Harper wiped her eyes and smiled. Yes, sweetheart. We won. Ivy looked at me. Did you win too, Mr. Caleb? I crouched in front of her. I think the biggest win is that you can still smile like that. Ivy thought for a second, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flower she had picked that morning. She handed it to me. This is for you because you helped Mommy. I took the flower. My throat tightened so quickly that I could not answer right away. That day, I understood something I had not been able to put into words before. I did not only love Harper. I loved the responsibility that came with loving her. I loved Ivy. I loved her questions, her obsession with dinosaurs, and the way she had slowly made a place for me in their small world. After Grace died, I believed my heart was a locked room I would never open again. But Harper and Ivy had not kicked down the door. They had simply stood outside it, tired, scared, and in need of a safe place to land. And I opened it. That summer, Harper and Ivy moved in with me. It did not happen right away. We talked about it for weeks, trying not to rush Ivy into something big just because the adults were happy. But Ivy was the one who kept pushing. Every time we left my house, she would ask, why can't we just sleep here all the time? Harper would blush, and I would pretend to check the lock so she would not see me smiling. On moving day, the quiet house I had lived in for 3 years turned into a maze of cardboard boxes, stuffed animals, tiny red shoes, and Ivy running from room to room, announcing which spaces now belonged to the dinosaur princess. Harper stood in the middle of the living room holding a box, her eyes wet. I walked over. Regretting it already? She shook her head. No. I just never thought I would have a place where I could put my things down, without being afraid I'd have to pack them again. I took the box from her hands. Then put them down. There's room here. From that day on, our life was not perfect. But it was real. Harper cut back on extra shifts. I came home to noise instead of silence. Some evenings, Ivy scattered markers all over the floor. Some evenings, Harper fell asleep before dinner was finished. Once, we argued because I fixed a shelf without asking. But every argument ended with us still in the same house, still choosing each other. Ivy started calling me Papa Caleb on an ordinary Tuesday night. I was fixing a small star-shaped nightlight in her room. She sat on the bed in pajamas, hugging her stuffed dinosaur, and said it as though it were the most normal thing in the world. "Papa Caleb, can you take me to school tomorrow?" My hand froze on the screwdriver. Harper stood in the doorway, completely still. Ivy did not realize she had just changed everything. She simply waited for my answer. I swallowed and tried to keep my voice steady. "Of course, sunshine." I had to step into the hallway afterward, because I did not want her to see me cry. Harper followed me out and wrapped her arms around me from behind. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded, but the tears kept falling. I didn't know anyone could still call me that. She pressed her forehead against my back. "She chose you." Exactly 1 year after the night we met, I brought Harper and Ivy back to Evergreen Cafe on the same date. Mrs. Bellamy had kept the string lights glowing, and the smell of coffee and waffles filled the air. Harper no longer walked intense and ready to be rejected. She sat beside me, Ivy between us, her eyes sparkling when she saw the little dinosaur decorations Mrs. Bellamy had already placed on our table. We sat in the same booth from that first night. Harper looked around and said quietly, "I still can't believe I cried here." I reached under the table and took her hand. "I'm just grateful you stayed long enough for me to ask if I could sit down." I carried the ring in my jacket pocket the entire evening. Ivy knew. She had been vibrating with excitement for hours, absolutely terrible at keeping secrets. I stood and walked around the table to Harper's side. The cafe gradually went quiet. Mrs. Bellamy was already standing behind the counter with a towel in her hands, her eyes shining even before I said a word. I dropped to one knee. Harper covered her mouth with her hand. I looked at her and said the only thing that felt true. "A year ago, you walked into this cafe thinking you were about to be rejected again. I was sitting over there, thinking my evening would be just another lonely one. Then some idiot walked away, and I found the courage to ask whether I could sit with you and Ivy." I opened the small box. "Harper Weston, you are not a burden. Ivy is not a burden. The two of you are the reason there is light in my house again. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your family not only on easy days, but also on the days when everything is frightening, confusing, and you need someone who stays?" Harper was already nodding before I finished. "Yes, Caleb. Yes." Ivy threw both hands into the air and shouted, "Now we have a family." The whole cafe laughed and clapped. Mrs. Bellamy brought out juice for Ivy and champagne for the adults, then announced that the rest of the evening was on the house, because she had been waiting for that moment for an entire year. We got married the following summer, in a small garden filled with white and purple flowers. Ivy was the flower girl and took her role very seriously, except for the 2 times she was distracted by butterflies, and the 1 time she found a rock she claimed looked like a dinosaur egg. Harper's best friend, Megan, cried so hard that we teased her all day about being the one who had once set Harper up on a date with Brandon. Mrs. Bellamy came too, and she brought fresh waffles. In my vows, I looked at Harper and said, "I promise I will never make you feel as though love is something you have to ask permission for. I promise I will never treat your past like a problem, or Ivy like something extra that comes attached to you. I promise to choose both of you every day, not only with words, but with what I actually do." Harper cried when she read hers. "I used to believe I was just someone people left behind. But you sat down at a table where I had just been humiliated, and you looked at me and Ivy as if we were worth choosing. You did not try to fix me, or turn me into someone else. You simply stayed long enough for me to believe I was still worth being chosen." After the ceremony, Ivy ran through the garden calling me Papa Caleb, as though she had been saying it her whole life. Harper stood beside me, her hand in mine, and we watched our daughter spin in the sunlight. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I used to think that night was one of the worst nights of my life. I looked at her. And now? She smiled. Now it's the night you found us. I watched Ivy laughing in the grass, and Harper standing beside me with the ring I had placed on her finger. I thought of Grace and the years I had lived like a house with locked doors. I thought of Harper, who had once been called baggage simply because she loved her daughter more than any date. And I thought of Ivy, who had asked a question no child should ever have to ask. Am I baggage? My answer that night, and every night after, would always be the same. No. Ivy was not baggage. Harper was not baggage. They were a gift I had not known I was still allowed to receive. Our story began with one simple question. May I sit with you too? And that question became the beginning of my family.